wrapping all the way around the center. Center on the satellite image is located right about there. And you can see these cold cloud tops are now expanding off to the north and west of that center. So that's really what we've been watching for the past couple of days to see, can these thunderstorms wrap around the quote unquote up shear side of the circulation? And the answer today has been yes. The storms are rotating up shear, and that has been really what has allowed the storm to gain quite a bit of strength in the last, say, 6 to 8 hours or so. That said, the hurricane is not quite in final form yet. There is still a couple of challenges it's going to be facing over the coming hours. The first challenge is this little dry slot. You can see it here, the warming cloud tops on the southern flank of the circulation right there. That's a little bit of mid-level dry air that's sort of sneaking into the circulation. It's not really causing the core much trouble because the core is walling itself off just to the west of that dry air intrusion. And so long as that dry air remains displaced from the inner core, I don't think it's really going to slow Sally down all that much. This is basically what the H-Wharf model has been depicting for the past couple of days, and especially in this afternoon's run, is that we get this sort of elongated, lopsided circulation. So this is what we had this morning, at least according to the H-Wharf. You have the center of the storm over here, and then you have all this thunderstorm activity sort of mostly focused off north and east of the center, with this prominent dry slot around the southern side. So that's what the model was expecting us to have this morning. It's pretty much what we're seeing this afternoon. And as we move into the model forecast for this afternoon, you can see that what the model is expecting is actually rather close to what we're seeing. So here would be the inner core of the system, right around here. Notice that it's relatively small, it's relatively symmetric, but it's also sort of located at the tail western end of this big wedge, I guess you can call it, of heavy thunderstorm activity. And then in between the core and the wedge, you have this intrusion of dry air from the southwest. So long, again, as there's this separation horizontally between the inner core and that dry air intrusion, the storm's not really going to notice it all that much. It's still going to be able to build these intense convective updrafts around the eye wall, which is where it's most important for the circulation to deepen. And that's going to allow the storm to continue intensifying tonight. And that's really what the H-Wharf has been showing, at least for the past several runs. So even with this dry slot, and you can see it doesn't ever really go away all that much as the storm gets closer to the coastline, at least according to this model depiction. But basically what the H-Wharf has been saying is that, yeah, you're going to have this dry air intrusion, but it's really not going to matter much in the end because the inner core is going to be more or less unbothered. And unfortunately, that's basically what we're seeing this afternoon. I'm going to pull up my radar imagery here, and that provides us another way of sort of getting some more perspective on this. So this is radar imagery out of, I think this is Eglin Air Force Base over in Florida. This is the storm center. You can see it's trying to develop this very small eye feature right here. And if that's really able to get going, and that's really where the low-level center of circulation is, which, again, I think that's where it is, but we're going to have to wait for the Hurricane Hunter plane to get in there in about an hour or so, and that'll tell us for sure. You notice that it has several layers of defense against this dry air intrusion. Which again is fairly clearly visible on the southwestern flank of the system. So that's the dry air right there. And then there's this sort of protective pocket, I guess is what you can call it. This is sort of like the pocket in football, right? You got the quarterback in here and you got the defense coming in there. But it's the job of the offensive line to make sure the two can't meet. And that's really what the Hurricane is trying to do here. It's setting up the formation so that the core itself is protected from this intrusion of dry air. So even though the storm's overall convective profile is still a bit lopsided, you can see most of the heavy weather off to the north and east of the storm over here. Even though the overall system is a little bit lopsided, it's the inner core symmetry that's really important. That's what's going to give you your maximum intensity. And the fact that we're seeing that inner core become more symmetric, become separated horizontally from the dry air intrusion, those are all signs that tell me that the system probably has a ways more to go in terms of intensification. At least it has plenty of gas in the tank that it could use to intensify if everything sort of pans out for it. The official Hurricane Center forecast is expecting landfall to occur along the along the sort of Louisiana Mississippi coastline here. Oops, rather, I guess it's a little bit farther off to the west. Hurricane Center forecast track, I guess, is going to look something like this. It sort of comes up here very close to far southeastern Louisiana and then up into Mississippi. Something like that is where the Hurricane Center has it. I think that's pretty, that's a pretty good guess for track. That's right down the middle, say the range of possible outcomes, or maybe that's perhaps marking a little bit of the western edge. I think that if I were to draw my own cone of uncertainty again in my unofficial capacity here, it would probably look something like this, maybe a little bit farther west. But really, I think this is a Mississippi to Alabama. That's where I'm sort of honing in on where I think the landfall location is going to be. That's where the latest Hurricane Center forecasts have been trending. So if you're over in New Orleans, this is really good news. You're no longer expected to see the worst of Hurricane Sally. The impacts in New Orleans might actually be fairly limited if the storm were indeed to track closer to, say, the Alabama-Florida border than the Alabama-Mississippi border. So New Orleans definitely spared what could have been a major hurricane impact from Sally. But of course, where one area gets good news for a hurricane, somebody else gets bad news. And that bad news is really coming for the Mississippi, Alabama coastline into the far western part of the Florida Panhandle. Really important to note as we're talking about where the center might come on shore that remember, we've seen this storm, most of the rain sort of all lopsided off to the east here. So even as the center, say, comes in, if we were to take the sort of western track a little bit more, say the center were to sort of do something like this, and it was to come a little bit west, really skirt these barrier islands here, and then make landfall, say, near Gulfport, Mississippi, before turning off to the north and east. Even if this is where the center is going to track, where are you going to put this wedge of heavy weather? Heavy weather meaning the really strong winds, heavy rain, major flooding, a lot of storm surge in here too. Well, that's going to extend, from, say, just west of the landfall location all the way east into the Florida Panhandle. So even if you are in, say, Port St. Joe, Panama City, this whole part of the Florida coastline, Pensacola especially, you may be 100 miles or 200 miles from the point where Sally makes landfall. However, you're also going to see 2 feet of rain potentially. That's included in the latest forecast by the Hurricane Center, by the WPC, which is in charge of predicting rainfall. 2 feet of rain possible in here as these bands move on shore. Storm surge 3 to 6 feet or more, especially as you head towards places like Mobile Bay, where the surge is going to be funneled up the bay here with the local topography. And you're going to see winds of at least tropical storm force, perhaps hurricane force. So it's really important with Sally especially, and we say this for all tropical cyclones because it's true, but especially in the case of Sally, try your very hardest not to focus on where exactly the center is going to move onshore. Wherever, X marks the spot on the beach, if that spot is right here in Gulfport, Mississippi, if it's a little bit farther west or a little bit farther east, it really doesn't matter because the storm has so much water, so much rain and surge, and plenty of wind over here too, off to the east of the system, that no matter where its exact center moves onshore, there's going to be some serious flooding issues across widespread portions of the western Florida Panhandle, southern Alabama, southern Mississippi. So try not to focus too much on exactly where the center is going to come onshore. We don't quite know if it's going to be here in Mississippi or perhaps even here in Alabama. maybe even as far east as the Pensacola, Florida area. That's certainly can't be ruled out. But heavy weather will extend far from the center of circulation regardless. It's also important to note, as far as the timing goes, that the storm is expected to go from here to somewhere over here in more than 24 hours, right? The Hurricane Center forecast point, I think, is somewhere around here for 7 p.m. Central Time tomorrow. So that's, we're looking at more than 24 hours from now. The storm's still not yet making landfall. By the time you get to 30 or 36 hours from now, the storm should be onshore, but barely. And yet, we're starting to see the storm surge already picking up across parts of the Louisiana coastline. If we move back here and look at the storm surge, this is a really neat site here that you can track the water levels in near real time. If we go to the Shell Beach, look, we're already in moderate flood stage where we have a surge of 3.5 feet. And Sally is still more than 24 hours from landfall. It's still several hundred miles offshore. But these onshore winds that we're seeing with the station observations here, they're piling the water up onshore, even right now. So you can see these stations reporting 30 miles an hour, here a little bit lighter on once you get closer to land. But that water is already being funneled up towards these barrier islands. So even well ahead of the actual center itself, you're getting water levels to start rising along the coastline here. And that's going to produce this surge even in areas that may not see very much heavy rain. Notice that you don't have to go very far west of the circulation to be outside of the rain shield. And that's because there's this westerly wind shear that we've been talking about for so long. It's sort of keeping most of this heavy thunderstorm activity located east of the center. So that westerly shear is going to really cut down a whole lot on the rain threat for southeastern Louisiana. But even without much in the way of heavy rain, the storm's winds are pushing a lot of water onshore here. So the water levels are already rising. Keep that in mind as you're wrapping up any final preparations tonight and tomorrow morning. Even though the storm may be 12, 24 hours out from landfall, you may not have all that time or even most of that time left to prepare safely. You're going to see tropical storm force winds approaching well ahead of the center. You're going to see rising storm surge cutting off evacuation routes, inundating parts of the coastline here. So really, you don't have a whole lot much more time to prepare safely for the arrival of Sally in southeastern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. So Mark will be keeping you updated from the road. I'll do some more cut-ins as we learn more about Sally, exactly how strong it's going to get. How much more it will intensify, that's still a little bit of an open question. We don't know if this is going to come onshore as a 100-mile-an-hour Category 2 storm. That's right around where the Hurricane Center forecast is as of the latest update. Or if it's going to come in a little bit stronger. We could see winds up to 115 miles an hour, as some of the model guidance is showing. But really, I promise you won't be able to notice that much of a difference between 115 miles an hour and 105 miles an hour. And besides, those winds are only occupying, say, that much area, right? So that's about where the radius of maximum winds are going to be found in the storm right now. And you could extrapolate that out a little bit to the coast and say, all right, if the center comes onshore right here in Gulfport, Mississippi, you're going to get 2 or 3 beachfront towns right there to experience what we call the maximum sustained winds of 105 or 115 or 120 miles an hour. I honestly don't know what that number is going to be. But it only matters if you're right there. If you're anywhere else, it's not going to matter because you're not going to see those winds anyway. We know that the radius of hurricane force winds extends quite a bit farther from the center. Looks something like that. Also extending into the northwestern quadrant here. So if the center is making landfall there, you might get that one or two towns to see the major hurricane force winds, but a much wider swath of the coast would be in that hurricane force wind zone. And that's really what matters at the moment. So, and of course, remember that the wind is honestly the least of your concerns. If you are along this part of the coastline, the 6 to 9+ foot storm surge is much more of a concern to you, as well as the 1 to 2+ feet of rain. Those are where your concerns should be, really a whole lot more than the winds. So we'll watch the winds, see what happens as the storm continues to intensify on approach to the coastline. But the water is the main story here with this hurricane, and even the winds, to the extent that they're going to be an issue. And of course, hurricane force winds do cause problems, but that's the debate of whether this can be a Category 2 or a Category 3 storm really only matters for about 2 towns where those that right front quadrant eye wall comes ashore. And whether those 2 towns happen to be here in Gulfport or farther east, wherever those 2 towns might be, I honestly can't tell you right now. But that's where the intensity forecast really matters, and for the rest of us, it really doesn't. So with that in mind, that's it from me for now. We'll get the next update from the Hurricane Center in about an hour. The hurricane hunters are dutifully flying in there to get the very latest information for us. So Mark will keep you updated from the road, and I'll check back in later. Thanks so much for tuning in and for watching, everyone. Stay safe.
Continue on I-10 east for 15 miles.